with people like Healy in your background, followed by Fitzgibbons, who did a remarkable job for us in leading us through that period where we made incredible gains, cementing them in place for workers all over Australia. And then alongside him was a bloke called Norm Docker, who on his retirement was described by Sir John Moore as being the greatest advocate the trade union movement ever produced. To be followed by Tas Ball, which brings me to the international position, because amongst a lot of other things, Tas Ball is a great internationalist, and it was he, more than anyone else, who educated us and positioned us for the trade union support that we received internationally. He was a great advocate of the International Transport Workers Federation and the position of solidarity around the world. And I've got absolutely no doubt that it was the work that he did and that I attempted to actually follow on and build on, which enabled us to call in the ILWU and the International Transport Workers Federation and all of their affiliates to threaten this government and this employer with international solidarity. And that wouldn't have happened without the heritage that was available for us to take advantage of, put in place by people like Healy and Docker and Fitzgibbons and Tas Ball, and the seafarers, of course, through their leadership, offered us the same opportunity. But I, speaking from my experience, having worked with all of those people, with the exception, of course, of Healy, it was a wonderful inheritance in this union, and it virtually ensured that irrespective of the challenge, you couldn't possibly fail. You couldn't possibly fail.
I've been in two unions, firstly the Seamen's Union and secondly the Waterside Workers Federation. Both of them by any measurement, strong unions, well respected by the community. And many people have asked over the years, what is it that's so special about these two unions? I believe that it's the internal discipline and the unity that's been developed that makes those two unions special. And of course it's those two unions that form the Maritime Union of Australia.
I'd like to say something about the amalgamation of the Seamen's Union and the Waterside Workers Federation. For decades we had resolutions of both organisations that we should amalgamate with each other. And they were both very strong, very member participatory unions and very proud of their organisations.
I certainly believe it's been very successful, and the reasons why I suspect are because it was an amalgamation of two of a kind. The similarity between wharfies and seafarers, the political position, the trade unions themselves, the leadership, the history, all proved to be the basis for the future, which has meant that the amalgamation was very quickly adapted to by the members, adapted to much quicker than the officials actually, I think, in many respects, but nevertheless, yes, I think it's been a marvellous success. The first problem we had to contend with in that dispute was the fact that various courts around the country ruled us ineligible to be there as leaders, and that presented a very significant problem, particularly, given the level of leadership that was required for the rank and file. And people like John Maitland filled in for us and took over and developed a roster, actually, in many ports where we had trade union leaders taking over for us and doing our job. And I suspect that was quite significant in terms of the way that we actually got the trade union movement behind us, because we introduced them to the dispute very early because of the need for people to take our running in terms of leadership. Their rank and file followed, and we had such magnificent support.
Examples of the capacity of the MUA, based on its history of the two unions I've mentioned, is of course the world-acclaimed 1998 dispute, which not only was a dispute with the employers, but was also with the government, and indeed, something quite rare in Australia, an organised Scab body in the form of the National Farmers Federation. By any measurement, for a union to come out of such a struggle as that, as it did, with such a victory, was truly remarkable.
There was various stages that we reached that were highlights, although, as I said at the time, on each occasion we got a victory in the court, there was always another bitter pill to swallow. And our first 3 or 4 victories in the courts were all stood aside whilst the appeal process was followed through. But when we look back on them now, and you put them in perspective, they were all highlights, of course. They were all steps in the stage of overturning the actions of the federal government and Patrick's. And then ultimately, I suppose, to have the privilege of being present and asked to be the first to walk through the gate in the company of my wife, Gwen, on the day that we achieved occupation again of the waterfront, is a moment that I'll never ever forget. That was the very first time that I accepted that they could do no more to us, and that we were back, and that we were back inside, and that whatever followed on from that would be able to be improved upon, and perhaps never again in our lifetime would a government and an employer think that they could destroy a union by the use of mercenaries and dogs and chains and balaclavas to remove a legitimate workforce in this country.
When the Patrick's dispute arose, and the dogs and the masks and the government and Dubai and all the rest of it that they supported in the attack upon the Waterside Workers Federation, there was a 100% response from Seamen, and the picket lines that I attended, there were as many Seamen as anybody else, I suppose. And it was the wonderful support from the public generally, the ordinary bloke, the trade union movement, the international movement, great leadership from all concerned, and a discipline. They were the most disciplined areas. As the police were pulling off the picket line, the discipline continued. There wasn't any actions that the press could blow up to just help destroy the organisation, and they would have had they been able to do it. The success was a great credit, and I felt pretty wonderful about the Patrick dispute and the winning of it, and the fact that our amalgamation had stood up to the greatest test the trade union movement has been put to for many, many years. So I subscribe to MUA here to stay.
And so when you look back, this wasn't always evident during the dispute because you had no time to analyse these things. But when you look back, there was a huge swing in support for our position. And that's something that they can never change, irrespective of how many years pass or how many people try. It was the day that the trade union movement stood up, headed by the ACTU and people like Bill Kelty and Greg Combay, and behind them formed this huge battalion of support from academics, from so-called, a term I don't like using, ordinary Australians, who came down in their thousands and donated thousands of dollars to the campaign. And we got such international support. It was measured so important that Reith and Howard threatened to apply the Crimes Act against me and the union because of our capacity to solicit international support. Now, the Crimes Act hadn't been enforced for many, many years prior to 1997-98. But that's a measurement of how concerned they were at our capacity to get that support. And we got that support because of the heritage that the Maritime Union of Australia enjoyed. Its position, Tasbull made the Waterside Workers Federation the best known dockers union in the world. And we had supported a lot of campaigns around the world. And when we wanted support, they came and supported us. And that's true internationalism, true international solidarity.